A team spends an entire weekend building a new process from scratch. The result is clunky, slow, and genuinely worse than what they had before. Nobody outside the team can stand using it. Everyone who touches it from the outside asks, politely at first, why it's built this way. And the team defends it anyway, fiercely, as if you'd insulted their own child, over a workflow that objectively slows everyone down. That reaction has a name, and it comes from an unlikely place: flat-pack furniture. It's called the IKEA effect. It explains a huge chunk of workplace behavior that otherwise looks completely irrational from the outside. It explains why bad tools survive. It explains why good tools get rejected. And once you see it, you cannot watch a team defend a mediocre process without immediately wondering who built it and why they can't let it go. Here's where the name comes from. It's a more literal origin than most psychology terms get. Researchers Michael Norton, Daniel Motion, and Dan Ariely ran an experiment using actual furniture from actual IKEA boxes, not a hypothetical, not a survey question about furniture in the abstract. They had one group assemble the furniture themselves, screws, instructions, the whole tedious process. Another group received the exact same furniture, fully built, no assembly required. Then they asked both groups a simple question: how much would you pay for this? The people who built it themselves valued it far higher than the people who received the identical finished product. Same materials, same design, same object, essentially, once it was standing in the room. The only difference was who had done the assembling. And that single difference completely changed how much the thing was worth in the eyes of the person looking at it. Sit with that for a second. It's a strange result if you think about it purely in terms of logic. The finished chair and the self-assembled chair are, for all practical purposes, the same chair. Nobody sits in it and feels more comfortable because they personally tightened the bolts. The comfort is identical. The wood is identical. And yet the price people were willing to attach to it was not identical at all. The effort itself, the hours spent squinting at a diagram and turning an Allen key, created attachment that had nothing to do with the quality of the final object. Ownership drove the value, not craftsmanship, not usefulness, just the simple fact of having personally put it together with your own hands. There's something almost embarrassing about how simple that mechanism turns out to be. We like to think our judgments about quality are based on quality. This research suggests a decent chunk of that judgment is actually based on labor, our own labor specifically, retroactively dressed up as an opinion about the object's worth. You didn't decide the shelf was good and then feel proud of building it. You built it, and the pride quietly became the verdict. And it doesn't take much effort to trigger this, either. Nobody needed to build a masterpiece for the effect to kick in. A basic shelf, assembled with a printed instruction sheet and a small hex key, was enough to produce a measurably inflated sense of value. That's worth remembering the next time you assume ownership only forms after some heroic, difficult project. Apparently it forms after an ordinary Saturday afternoon with a screwdriver. It's worth asking why we're built this way at all, even briefly. The answer helps explain why the effect is so stubborn. Effort is expensive. Time is expensive. On some basic level, treating the things we've sunk real effort into as more valuable than they objectively are is a mental shortcut, a way of protecting our own past decisions from feeling wasted. Nobody enjoys the thought that a weekend of real work produced something mediocre. It's psychologically cheaper to decide the thing is actually pretty good than to sit with the alternative conclusion. That shortcut is efficient for protecting your own feelings. It's terrible for making accurate judgments about a shelf, or a spreadsheet, or an entire workplace process. Now take that finding and walk it straight into a normal office. This is where it gets genuinely useful for anyone managing people. The pattern shows up constantly, in a shape most managers have lived through without ever naming it. Picture a manager who sits down alone, writes a new process from start to finish, polishes it, and rolls it out to the team as a finished document. Reasonable plan, clearly explained, nothing obviously wrong with it on paper. And still, resistance shows up almost immediately. People find reasons to push back. Adoption is slow. Compliance is grudging. The process itself might be perfectly sound, and it still struggles to stick. Now picture a different manager, handling a comparable problem, who does something that looks less efficient on the surface. Instead of writing the finished process alone, they hand the team a rough starting point and let the team build the rest of it together. The result, this time, has rough edges. It's not as polished as the first manager's version. It probably has a few decisions in it that an outside consultant would quietly flag as suboptimal. And it gets adopted fast, with far less friction, almost regardless of those flaws. Here's the part that should stop you cold if you manage people. The actual content of the two processes barely matters to how well they get adopted. The authorship matters enormously. People don't just want a good process, they want a process they had a hand in building, even if their hand only touched a small corner of it. The IKEA effect isn't really about furniture at all. It's about the deep, apparently universal wiring that makes humans value what they helped make, independent of how good that thing objectively turns out to be. Think about how counterintuitive that is for anyone trained to optimize for quality. Most managers assume the job is to design the best possible process and then simply explain it clearly enough that people adopt it. That assumption quietly skips over the actual variable driving adoption. You can outdesign a team's homemade process on every measurable dimension: timeline, clarity, efficiency. You can still lose the adoption fight because you're not really competing on quality. You're competing against the fact that they built theirs and you built yours. This is exactly why forced buy-in sessions fail so often. It's worth being honest about why. Most managers have sat through one and sensed something was off, without being able to name it. A leadership team makes a decision behind closed doors. Then they schedule a workshop, hand out sticky notes, run a brainstorming exercise, and call it collaboration. But people can smell the difference between genuine unfinished work and a finished plan wearing a costume. The sticky notes get collected, the feedback gets nodded at politely, and the final decision that comes out the other end is, suspiciously, identical to the one that walked in. Employees learn to spot this pattern fast. Once they've spotted it once, they stop investing real effort in the next collaborative session. They've correctly concluded it's theater. Real IKEA effect requires the genuine article, actual, unfinished work, handed over honestly, with real decisions still open and real stakes attached to how it gets finished. Not a completed plan dressed up as a rough draft to make people feel consulted. The moment people sense the ending was pre-written, the whole mechanism collapses. You're left with all the awkwardness of a workshop and none of the ownership it was supposed to build. Picture the honest version instead. A manager needs a new onboarding checklist for the team. Instead of writing the finished document and presenting it Friday afternoon as feedback welcome, she writes down 6 bullet points. She admits openly that half of them are probably wrong. She asks the team to spend an hour rebuilding it together. Some of what survives that hour will look almost identical to what she would have written alone. That's fine. The value was never really about which specific bullet points survived. It was about the team physically rewriting, deleting, and rearranging the words themselves. It was about their own hands on the actual document, not someone else's finished draft with their name quietly added to a credits line at the bottom. But here's where this stops being a tidy little management tip and turns into something you should genuinely worry about if you've been managing the same team for more than a couple of years. The effect doesn't stay positive forever. The exact same attachment that makes people embrace a rough draft they helped build also makes them cling to tools, dashboards, and workflows they built themselves. That grip holds long after those things have clearly been outgrown by better options sitting right in front of them. A spreadsheet system a team built by hand years ago gets defended long after a proper tool would do the job faster and with fewer errors. A workflow gets protected, not because it's still good, but because letting it go would feel like discarding something people put real hours of their own effort into. Sunk labor quietly turns into identity. Replacing the tool starts to feel, at some emotional level, nobody actually says out loud in the meeting, like replacing a piece of the person who built it. This is the twist most people miss entirely when they first hear about the IKEA effect. It's usually framed as a cute trick for getting buy-in, a clever way to make people like your process more. Almost nobody talks about the expiration date on that same attachment, the point years later where the exact mechanism that made adoption easy now makes replacement brutally hard. The tool that got embraced fast because people built it themselves becomes the tool nobody can retire, for the same underlying reason. It's the same psychological wiring, just pointed in the opposite direction at a later date, against you instead of for you. Watch how this plays out in a typical team over a few years. Year 1, a scrappy homemade system gets built because there wasn't budget or time for anything fancier. It works well enough. People are proud of it, rightly, because they built something functional out of nothing. Year 3, a much better commercial tool exists, cheaper and more reliable than the homemade version in nearly every way. The conversation to switch should be simple on paper. It rarely is. Someone on the team, often the person who originally built the homemade system, quietly starts finding reasons the new tool isn't quite ready or doesn't handle our edge cases. Some of those objections are genuine. A meaningful number of them, if you're honest, are grief wearing the costume of a technical concern. And here's my own honest take on why this matters more than a simple furniture study would suggest. I think most managers assume resistance to change is about the change itself, about people fearing the new system or doubting it'll work. But a lot of the time, the resistance isn't about the new thing at all. It's grief for the old thing, dressed up as a rational objection about features or migration cost. I don't want to let go of something I built is a much harder sentence to say out loud in a meeting than the new tool is missing a feature. The IKEA effect doesn't just explain why people love what they build. It explains why they'll fight, sometimes irrationally, to protect it long after it's stopped, earning that loyalty on merit. That reframing changes how you should handle the pushback when it shows up. Arguing harder about features rarely works. Features were never really the real objection in the first place. What actually works is naming the emotional layer directly, gently, without embarrassing anyone in front of the team. That means acknowledging out loud that the old system represents real effort and real pride. It means saying plainly that retiring it isn't a verdict on the person who built it. Sometimes just saying that plainly, once, does more to unstick a stalled migration than another spreadsheet full of feature comparisons ever could. So what's the actual practical move here? The one worth taking directly into your next project? If you want a process, a tool, or a workflow to genuinely stick with your team, resist the urge to hand over the finished, polished version. No matter how good it is or how much time it would save everyone up front, hand over a rough first draft instead. Leave visible gaps in it, on purpose. Leave decisions genuinely open, not fake open, not pre-decided and dressed up to look flexible. Let the team finish assembling it themselves, with their own hands on the actual construction, not just their signatures on someone else's blueprint at the end of a workshop. It'll probably come out a little messier than what you would have written alone, sitting at your own desk with full control over every line. It will very likely still get adopted faster. It will likely be more durable once it's in daily use. Durability, it turns out, was never really about how well built the thing was in the first place. It was always about who got to hold the Allen key. And knowing about the dark side now means you can plan for it in advance, instead of getting surprised by it years down the road. Build in a deliberate expiration date on ownership from the start. Revisit the tools your team built themselves on a real schedule. Not only when something breaks badly enough to force the conversation, ask directly whether a workflow is still being kept because it's good or because someone in the room helped build it, and nobody wants to say the quiet part out loud. Naming that distinction early is a lot cheaper than discovering it the hard way, in the middle of a migration nobody on the team actually wants to cooperate with. Two very different management problems, then, both explained by the exact same weekend spent assembling furniture. One version helps you. Hand people an unfinished thing, let them build it. It survives the ordinary friction that kills most new processes. The other version quietly works against you, years later, when the thing they built stops being the best option and nobody can bring themselves to say so out loud. Same wiring, same shelf. Completely different outcome depending on which end of the timeline you're standing on. So think back to that clunky process from the opening, the one nobody outside the team could stand, the one the team defended like it was family. It wasn't a bad decision by bad people. It was a completely predictable outcome of a completely ordinary weekend spent building something with their own hands. It was, in spirit, the exact same weekend that made a stranger pay more for a shelf they screwed together themselves. If breakdowns like this change how you think about your own team's resistance to change, Drop a comment below with the tool or process your team is still clinging to. Tell us why you think it's really still around.